Welcome, everyone, to another session of Progressive Christian Voices today and tomorrow. My name is Brian Elaine. I'm the founder of Compassion Christianity, Writing for Your Life. It is a pleasure to host this series of prominent Christian writers, all of whom have been published by Broadleaf Books or one of the other 1517 media imprints like Fortress Press and Beaming Books. And this webinar will be followed by two more on October 11th and 13th that are also part of this series. So joining us tonight are Jennifer Grant, Brian McLaren, and Sophfronia Scott. Jennifer is the author of 6 books for adults and several for children. In 2021, she released Once Upon a Time, Not So Long Ago, a picture book about how the pandemic continues to shape us. Her latest release for adults, Dimming the Day, will officially launch in a few weeks and is a book of evening reflections on nature. Jennifer spends her time doing both her own creative work as well as editing and editorial consulting. Passionate about helping all children flourish and being a believer in the power of story, she recently joined the board of Gender Nation, an organization she loves. Gender Nation helps communities empower and validate all children by providing public school libraries with LGBTQ plus affirming literature. Awesome. You can go to gendernation.org to learn more. The mother of 4 young adults, Jennifer and her husband David, are now empty nesters that live in Chicago. She's spoken at several of the Writing Life conferences and curates the Faith and Food page for Compassionate Christianity. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Brian McLaren is an author, speaker, activist, and public theologian. A former college English teacher and pastor, he's a passionate advocate for a new kind of Christianity, just, generous, and working with people of all faiths for the common good. He's a faculty member of the Living School and podcaster with Learning How to See, which are both part of the Center for Action and Contemplation. He's also an Auburn Senior Fellow and works closely with the Wild Goose Festival, the Fair Food Program, and Vote Common Good. His recent projects include an illustrated children's book for all ages called Cory and the Seventh Story, and also Galapagos Islands, A Spiritual Journey. His newest book is Faith After Doubt, Why Your Beliefs Stop Working and What to Do About It. And I should mention, there's an interview that I did with Brian about that book recently. So if you go to the Writing for Life website, you'll find that, as you'll find an interview that I recently did with Jennifer about Once Upon a Time, Not So Long Ago. So I forgot to mention that earlier. Sorry. Brian's newest release is Do I Stay Christian? And it'll be available in the spring of 2022. He also contributed to our recent book, How to Heal Our Divides, and has spoken at several of our events and has been a generous collaborator on many different fronts. So Brian, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
So good to be here. Thanks.
Sophfronia Scott holds a BA in English from Harvard and MFA in writing from the Vermont College of Fine Arts. She began her career as an award-winning magazine journalist for Time and for People. When her first novel, All I Need to Get By, was published, Sophfronia was nominated for Best New Author at the African American Literary Awards and was hailed as potentially one of our best writers of her generation. Her latest book is The Seeker and the Monk, Everyday Conversation with Thomas Merton. Sophronia's other books include Unforgivable Love, Love's Long Line, Doing Business by the Book, and This Child of Faith, Raising a Spiritual Child in a Secular World, which was co-written with her son Tane. Sophfronia is the recipient of a 2020 Artist Fellowship Grant from the Connecticut Office of the Arts. She's taught at Regis University's Mile High MFA and Bay Path University's MFA in Creative Nonfiction. Currently, Sophfronia is the founding director of Alma College's MFA in Creative Writing, a low residency graduate program. I also have to point out that Sophfronia has spoken at more of my writers' conferences than any other speaker. So I'm very appreciative of that and very glad to have her here with us tonight yet again. So this evening, I'm going to ask our panelists several different questions, but if any attendee would like to also ask something, please type your question into the Q&A box on the Zoom portal. But perhaps I'd love for each of you to tell us just a little bit about what's new. What was the most recent thing that you're working on? So Jennifer, maybe you want to start?
Sure. Actually, so you mentioned Dimming the Day, which is the Broadleaf Books book, is coming out shortly. Amazon, of course, has already sent it out, but it's supposed to be released in a couple of weeks. And this book is a book of reflections on nature, as you mentioned, kind of addressing some of the general anxiety that we are all feeling. And instead of sort of ending the day scrolling on our phones, the idea with this book is to reflect on something in nature and to kind of allow the kind of wonder and awe in creation to kind of settle our minds and help us to sleep. So anyway, I think they did a beautiful job. Thank you, Broadleaf Books. And I just finished writing a book, and Brian, I don't remember if I've told you this, but I have a book coming out in February with Church Publishing, and it's a book on prayer for kids who are 7 to 10 years old. And it's called Sing, Wrestle, and Spin. And the concept behind that one is that for all different kids of that age who might be, less comfortable expressing themselves verbally and more comfortable moving or more comfortable drawing something or expressing themselves vocally or whatever, this book has, I think it's 18 chapters, and each one is another verb. And so there's spin, there's wrestle, there's question, there's, all these different ways that I hope kids will connect with prayer. So that comes out in February. And as I mentioned, I've been doing a lot of editing, and I'm working on a few other books for Being Me Books right now. And really delighted to be here, and really, really proud of everything that's going on with Broadleaf Books. I feel like, every time I look on that website, I'm amazed by the writers I get to share that space with, because I think they are people of faith who are doing such important work and who are, promoting and exposing really a kind of Christianity that I hope will continue to be kind of elevated. So I'm so proud to be able to be counted among these writers.
Well, I love what Broadleaf has been doing, and they've been hiring recently, which is a really positive sign they're going to be doing even more wonderful things. So I'm very glad about that. So Brian, I know a little bit about what you've been up to, but why don't you share that with everyone else?
Well, yeah, first, I just want to say, Brian, how grateful I am to you for your good work in bringing people together, and how happy I am to meet Jennifer and Sophfronia. As I was hearing each of your introductions from Brian, I just felt like, gosh, we are, it's really good that we're getting to hang out. So many crossovers and shared interests, and especially this shared concern about children. And so much of the effort that's gone into progressive Christianity, compassionate Christianity, has been aimed at young adults and older adults. And meanwhile, the kids kept getting sent to, Sunday school classes and getting exposed to curriculum and books that are reinforcing all the things that we're trying to help the adults get out of. So this just feels to me so important. And one of the things that I was able to be involved with a few years ago is I co-wrote a children's book with a dear friend, Gareth Higgins, and an illustrator, award-winning illustrator named Heather, who called Cory and the Seventh Story. And it was my first, venture into children's book writing, but that whole process has just, one of the things it's done for me is just feel like in the years I have left, I want to encourage people like you who are doing this good work and get more and more people thinking creatively about what it is we want to pass on to our children. I before COVID, I do a lot of traveling. I've been doing a lot of traveling, and I would have to say in the last 7 to 10 years, the most consistent question I get asked when I'm traveling, speaking about my books for adults, is what are we going to do for our kids? And so this sense that something new is on the horizon, something new is really needed, in my experience, is pretty widespread. But to get back to your question, Brian, I'm deeply involved with Center for Action and Contemplation, doing some teaching there, and also a podcast with them, and with my own writing projects, and then just my interest in so many good things that are happening and my concerns about so many terrifying things that are happening. I feel like every day there's not enough hours. So
Isn't that the case?
Yeah.
Well, for everyone else, stay tuned because Brian and I are talking about another project that will address some of the concerns that hopefully address some of the concerns that Brian was just expressing relative to progressive Christian education for children. So stay tuned for that. So Sophfronia, hello, good evening. Great to see you again.
Brian. Yes.
Tell us what you've been up to. Besides Alma MFA, I know that's been pretty consuming.
Yeah, recruiting for our next class right now. But I just finished a novel, Brian.
You're kidding.
I'm not. I
Good
just
for
finished
you.
a novel.
Congratulations.
And I'm expecting the editorial notes from my editor any day now and for it to get on the production schedule. So that's a big thing off my plate at the moment. But the rest is like Brian, I do travel and that's picking up again. So I'm going to be teaching a Merton workshop later this month at the Holy Family Retreat Center in Hartford. And I'll be at the Merton Center in Louisville, Kentucky in February delivering their Black History Month lecture. And I'll be presenting at the Merton, the British Merton Society's conference in April. So I'm going to England for that. So, but yeah, a lot of things going on.
You've always been very busy and very productive. So not surprising to hear that there are multiple balls in the air.
Yeah.
So one thing we were talking about before everyone else got on was that, I've worked extensively with each of you, but this is the first time that you've all met each other, which is like shame on me, for not making that happen earlier. So I apologize, seriously, because you all are like some of my favorite people. And so we'll need to rectify that, more going forward. So anyway, one of the things that we want to talk about during this seminar is like, what are you reading from other folks that, you'd like to share with the rest of the world? So Jen, how about you starting us off there?
Sure. I didn't pick this because it's a Broadleaf Books book, but it is. I've been reading the last few days this book, Feed the Wolf by John Sweeney. And I've known John actually for 40 years. Ever since high school, we've been friends, and always both of us wanted to be writers, which is kind of fun now to be at this point in life and to be able to hold these wonderful books that he's written. But I was glad that you asked about this because it's right next to me, but also I think it's pertinent to this conversation about what does progressive Christianity mean or what could be the future of it. And fairly early on in the book, he talks about the model that St. Francis is to him and how it's not about, and I'm paraphrasing wildly here, so forgive me, but it's not about right thought or right theology or those things, but it's about kindness and vulnerability and facing your fear and calling out things that are wrong and just really living in the path of Jesus, living a life that is full of love and vulnerability and isn't, it's not the sort of toxic messages that we hope to unravel from kids or to prevent them from having, like, as we create children's literature, obviously, we want to give wonderful ideas about God's grace and God's love to kids that they won't ever have to recover from. But this book is kind of, he says it's kind of like a map, and if you follow it, you'll find a treasure, and then you can put away the map. And the treasure is just modeling our own behavior and after some of the things that Francis did in terms of loving others and living a really authentic, vulnerable life. So I'm loving this book so far. I'm only about halfway through it, but highly recommend it.
It sounds like it's being very well received.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jennifer, because John is, he's written a lot about Merton. So he is a noted Merton author. And right before I came on this webinar, I was reading the latest email from the International Thomas Merton Society, and it had a list of recent publications. And I saw that, and I was like, whoa,
great.
John has a new book. What is that? And now I know.
Yeah, and it's broadleaf books. Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Mhm.
Very cool. So Brian, how about you? What have you been reading in your spare time? Haha.
So, I bet that Jennifer and Sophfronia do this too, but I get a whole lot of manuscripts from other writers asking me to read, and it's a lot of work, but gosh, it's rewarding too. So believe it or not, this morning I read Walter Brueggemann's newest book that's about to come out. That is an exposition. You know how he takes biblical passages and relates them to things going on in our world. So this is a reflection on the book of Exodus and delving into some other areas. My gosh, just brilliant and good. Relating to what we were talking about before, I'm reading a book that's been around for quite a while called The Spiritual Child. It's not a religious, specifically religious, not a Christian book, but a book by a psychologist that's really, really interesting. So also finding out our shared interests in Merton and Francis. One of the kind of delights of my life the last 2 years is I've been doing a lot of work with different Franciscan groups, including a lot of wonderful Franciscan nuns. And I mentioned to one of them my interest in Francis and economy, because Pope Francis now has convened a group called the Economy of Francesco, inviting Catholic thinkers to start reimagining an economy that makes more sense, especially in a Christian sense. At any rate, she sent me this really interesting book, kind of an academic book called Franciscan Wealth from Voluntary Poverty to Market Society. And she's this book by Giacomo Todeschini, that's translated into English from Italian, goes back to a lot of early Franciscan writings and shows how they were very self-conscious of the ways they were trying to provide an alternative vision to the dominant and growing market economy that now, has become this global capitalism that we all live in. So anyway, those are a couple. I just read John Pavlovich's great new book, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. That, John has an incredible ability to write at a really popular level, but also to pack some real substance there. So those are a few good ones lately.
Very cool.
Okay, so I will tell you, Brian, that book, Lisa is the author of The Spiritual Child. So Lisa interviewed me extensively for that book.
Is that so?
It's a scientific book, so it's like our interviews aren't represented there, but those interviews led me to write this Child of Faith.
Wow.
Is that so?
Because she made me realize that there was something to say there, and I think she's mentioned in the acknowledgments. But yeah.
Well, I'm gonna have to read that now, so that'll be next on my list, Sophfronia. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sophfronia, go ahead.
Well, Brian, my reading tends to be at the moment. It's caught up in what I'm working on. So I just finished a novel, so I've been reading things like Diary of a Slave Girl, and reading about Black Civil War nurses. But and right now, today, for example, I was reading the book of Rent and also Hairspray, because I'm working on a musical now. So
very cool.
But Broadleaf sent an email today, and it was like, this book, and I ordered it right away, because this is a book that addresses an issue that I talk about in The Seeker and the Monk. This is Karen Waldron's book, The Lightmaker's Manifesto.
Oh, yeah.
I'm thrilled about this book, How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy. Because I find that is something that is always in my head, is that how do I work for change without having to bring anger to it, without becoming something that I'm not. And that's one of the conversations I have with Thomas Merton, like how to be an activist, or how to address racism without losing my sense of joy and compassion. And that's exactly what she's addressing here. how do we work for change, but will the emotional toil lead to burnout, right? And she's helping you to learn how to joyfully advocate for justice, peace, and liberation. We learn how to become makers of light. And I saw that and I'm like, yes, 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 get me that book right now. It's due to come out in November, but just like you said, Jennifer, I was surprised to order it. And of course, Amazon's going to ship it this week, right? That's kind of annoying, but yeah, I'm excited about this book.
Very cool. So for me, I was going to say two different books. This is one of them. Stephen Johnson, Where Good Ideas Come From, which is like almost a Bible for me in one level in terms of innovation and learning about how innovation happens. So there's another story around this that I won't get into, but this is one book that I read a couple of years ago and have been going back to it this week, and I just absolutely love it. The second book I was going to mention is one that Brian already mentioned by John Pavlovitz. If God is a jerk, if God is love, don't be a jerk, right? So, and my wife has that one, so I can't show that to you. But John, for those of you who don't know, just underwent surgery to remove a tumor off his pituitary gland, something like that. So he's still in recovery right now, but doing pretty well from what it sounds like. So I'll mention two other books. I just did 2 book interviews today. One was with Philip Yancey for his first memoir, believe it or not.
Oh,
yeah.
I've heard about that. Wow.
It's very good. And now I'm blanking on the title of it. But if you go to Philip's, Where the Light Falls, I think, or Where the Light Fell, I think is the title of it. So that's really interesting. And then Dante Stewart, Shoutin in the Fire. So Dante's a seminary student at Candler and an African-American pastor. And so that is really interesting too. I think he's going to be a really serious up-and-coming writer. So anyway, those are the ones that I've been involved in recently. So, all right. So next, thinking big. One of the things we want to talk about here in this series is, what you all see as the most pressing issues that progressive Christians need to be dealing with. And Brian, I think you kind of already gave us a little bit of a preview of your thoughts on that topic, but let's discuss this in more depth. And Jen, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Well, I mean, I think maybe, because the way this conversation is framing kind of around all of us being interested in kids, I'm seeing a lot of adults sort of, and this has been the case for my whole life, people who have had to kind of take off an ill-fitting, piece of clothing, that was the faith that they were taught when they were little. And for whatever reason has been something that has been really damaging and hurtful for them. And some people come to a place where they can separate that from the divine and their experiences of God and of spirit. And some people never can. And some people, say, I'm throwing the whole thing out. And so, so one of my kind of passions is kind of surrounding myself with like-minded writers who are doing such good work to create ways to, we've talked about this, Brian, quite a bit, but sparking spiritual curiosity in children in a way that doesn't give them these messages. I used to picture it when my own kids were little. I thought, I don't want to give them backpacks and then throughout their childhood be putting these ill-shapen, sharp rocks into that. And I don't want them then to become young adults and have to spend the next however many years or decades taking those things out. I wanted them just to kind of have more freedom than that. And I want that for my young readers of my books for kids as well, that they can then just be free to experience God in whatever way they do, and not feel like there are all these toxic, confusing messages. And so I am sort of focused on that. And so with some of our colleagues that we've worked with at your Children's Lit conferences, like Matthew Paul Turner and Glennis Nellis and Tracy Smith and so many others who I feel like we're gathering this momentum, and we all have very similar values and a similar passion for really bearing witness to God's love and to grace and to the beauty of creation, without all that stuff that is so terribly damaging. And so yeah, that's kind of, I've sort of placed myself in that community and want to support other writers who are doing this work and support efforts like your effort to create, we've been vetting with your daughter Jennifer, these children's books that are that we can communicate to progressive people of faith that these are safe. These are not ones that will make a child, question God's love. It might, or make a child question whether or not they're okay being who they are, and so all those efforts are really important to me. And I feel like that is when I look ahead, probably because I spend so much time reading children's literature, writing children's literature, studying it, that's really where my passions are. So it's fun that both, all of us on this call are committed to that. And I see that as a very hopeful thing. I think there are books that, I really scoured when my kids were little. I really looked for good Christian content, and I very rarely found anything that I wanted to share with my kids, and very rarely ever shared anything other than some wonderful, Zen Buddhist children's books, but not Christian ones. So I'm happy that there are now things that are so healthy, and maybe they can go through life and not know that there was this whole time where kids felt weird and guilty and had this sort of toxic shame around who they are. And anyway, so that's where my passion is. I'm rambling a bit, but.
Well, let me take off on, one of the elements that you talked about, Jen, was kind of this transition that many of us have gone through from, maybe what we were told or what we were taught or what we believed when we were younger to a different, form of Christianity now. Brian wrote this incredible book that I referred to earlier called Faith After Doubt that describes many different aspects of that transition and 4 different phases that, many people go through through those transitions. And by the way, on Monday night's webinar, I held that up, Brian, as one of the books that I recommended for everybody. So just so you know. But, you've done a lot, Brian, you've done a lot of work and thought in this area. Do you have a hypothesis as to why some people make the transition or make that transition further and other people don't?
Well, I think one of the things that, because you've read that book, that was a major kind of breakthrough realization for me. It's obvious in one way, but I think I felt it at a deeper level, is when we talk about faith, it has a lot to do with belonging. It has a lot to do with the groups that we want to belong to. And if your faith journey takes you to a place where if you continue to follow it, it puts you out of sync with the groups that you belong to, where you feel safe, where you felt nurtured, and you feel, if I were to be public about going to a different place, I would be ejected from those groups. I think that's a really, really big deal. I think it has, psychological effects, especially for people whose faith is important to them. So
it's a group
I think
thing.
that's
the peer pressure
And what's complicated by that I don't think we have really come to terms with yet, is that while religion has been a major source of belonging, it's almost as if all of our major sources of belonging have had this set of, buzzsaws go through them to create other kinds of belonging. So, this resurgence of white supremacy that we're all witnessing, that has a political party behind it, but also has a whole army of cable news channels and AM radio channels and all the rest, and websites and Facebook groups. And you just start thinking about all these different belonging groups that people become part of. And I think that's another issue here, that people are feeling torn. And unfortunately, because, progressive Christianity, compassionate Christianity, whatever you want to call it, is in many ways a minority report in the Christian religion right now. People don't have a sense that there's something there strong enough to belong to compensate for all of the other losses of belonging in other places. Now, that's a generalization, and thank God there are millions of exceptions to it. But I think that's part of the problem. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let me go back and ask you if you want to answer the original question that I asked about, what do you feel are the most pressing issues that we need to take action on?
Well, I mean, I as you know, I wrote a book about this in 2007, 2008 called Everything Must Change. And it was my attempt to try to say, what are the biggest problems in the world? And the simplest way, and I wish I had been wrong about that. But I feel like, unfortunately, that's just being confirmed. But if I were to summarize it as four things, it's the planet. We're not living sustainably with the planet. It's poverty, economic inequality that creates huge differentials of power. This, what was it called? The Pandora report, or
yes.
I forget that.
Yes, that's it.
But we're somewhere between, I've heard numbers as low as 8, and I've never heard numbers higher than about 30, oligarchs who own as much wealth as half of the rest of the world, right? So that concentration of wealth and power is just subverting everything in our world, and re-intensifies the first part because of a huge amount of their wealth comes from the fossil fuels that are destabilizing climate. Suddenly those two problems are deeply interwoven. The most powerful people are the most dangerous people at that moment. And then third, when you have unstable economics and unstable ecology, then people are at each other's throats. And we see, the resurgence of racism and nationalism and gender-related hate crimes and religious bigotry, and all of the issues of peace are accelerated. So planet, poverty, peace. And then the fourth, I think, is religion, in that our religion should be helping us out of this mess, but major parts of all of our religions are re-intensifying the mess. So that's why this kind of conversation that we're having, I think, is so important, that we need people in our religious communities. We need Christians who are doing this, just as we need Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and atheists and agnostics and all the rest, who are having these kind of conversations about what kind of future we want and how we're going to have solidarity among people with a kind of humane vision for the future, and then that leads to activism and strategy when we've got a pretty powerful pyramid that we're working against.
Well, that's kind of a bleak picture. That's a lot of really big issues.
Well, yeah. I'm sort of sorry to bring it up, but you asked, so.
Yeah. No, I'm not criticizing. So, Sophfronia, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. You asked Brian the question again, and had him answer it again. But I was thinking what that first part of what you were saying, Brian, about the divisions within the belonging, right? Yeah. To me, that's where I see the issues. And when you were speaking, it reminded me of Barbara Brown Taylor, and Brian Elaine, you may remember this because Barbara has spoken about this more than once at some of your events. She talks about the language of beholding versus the language of belief.
Yes.
And the language of beholding is what is, like, here we are, this is what's going on. And usually she said that when she's in a pastoral role, the language of beholding is being present with someone and what it is that they're going through. But the language of belief is about, what does this person believe? And she said that, especially in social media these days, people are beating each other up over the answer to that question, over, what do you believe? And then drawing the lines accordingly. And what's lousy about it is because the focus on belief has taken away the focus on beholding. And then she talks about how, especially in the King James Bible, that there are all of these references to behold, right? That we are called to behold, look, check, look.
Pay attention.
And that pay attention. And that belief comes after. You must behold first, and then you believe. But it's like we're skipping over that part and just believing and challenging each other about what you believe, and do you believe like I believe, without really understanding what we believe or why, right? So these divisions challenge the heart of who we are as Christians, because our compassion, it challenges compassion. Compassion is not there. Our sense of mercy is not there. And we don't think to even give voice to or understand or bring empathy to what this other person that we disagree with believe and why they believe that way, right? So there are these lines, and the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about belonging is that where is our belonging in God, with God, right? And we have put such stock in belonging to a group without recognizing or thinking about whether or not this group is helping to support my connection with God, right? And I do think that this is a tremendous issue, because it is the thing that we have to understand why we go to church, why we choose to belong to a group of people. And it's not just so that we can feel better about ourselves or feel safe somehow from being outcast, right? We belonging means something, and we have to understand what our Christianity means for ourselves in our heart in order to find the belonging with others, to help strengthen and develop one's Christianity. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and this isn't necessarily like a big issue, but it's kind of a solution, partial of solution, and connecting with what Jennifer's talking about, writing children's books and such. Why not encourage children and teens to write their own material? And I bring this up because my son, and I mentioned, you mentioned the book I wrote with my son, and that's not a children's book, that's a memoir, and he wrote his own parts of it. But and traveling around and speaking about this book, he eventually, over the past couple of years, said, at one of our events, he said, our book is great, but I don't see someone my age reading this. So he's been working on what's called a manga. It's a Japanese graphic novel, because to him, and he's exploring all of these ideas about where our loved ones go when they die, wrestling with Satan, all of these things, because he feels that, he can explore these things in this realm, and that teenagers his age will read this. I think that's fabulous. Let's encourage more kids to do stuff like that, to express faith in the way that they feel that they can best do it, and will speak to others. I could go on about all of this, but that's where I'm at.
Well, that's a really wise thought, and it needs to inform some of the things that I was mentioning earlier that we're planning to work on. So let's come back to that. Thank you, Sophfronia. Yeah. So, speaking of divides, you all know that I recently published this book, and Brian contributed to it, How to Heal Our Divides. So I'm very conscious about that question. There seems to be an increasingly wide gap between progressive and conservative, for lack of better terms, Christians in our country. So does that matter? Should we care about it? Should we try to do anything about it? I'm curious as to what you all think about that. So Jen, go ahead.
Well, I noticed something earlier today, I think it was today, where you had tweeted maybe about this series of webinars, and someone replied saying, why do you need to use that modifier? Or it's too bad you have to use the modifier compassionate Christianity. That should be a given, right? And I think it does matter, though, that, I'm Episcopalian, and I've always felt much more comfortable for years, if I describe myself as a religious person. I very rarely say Christian, although I am a Christian. But even prior to the last 5 years or so, that had so many connotations to many people that I knew, that if I said I am a member of the Episcopal Church, most people would go, oh, okay. That's a place that seems safe, or that's and I felt more comfortable using that modifier than Christian, which is unfortunate, right? It struck me as sad when that person said, oh, too bad you have to use, compassionate or progressive, both of which, I think we could all argue is what Jesus was about, compassion and caring for the most marginalized, right? So unfortunately, in maybe the louder mainstream and all those websites and Facebook groups that Brian was referring to, they feel comfortable using, what they say is a Christian faith, which I think many of us would argue is more like a white nationalist set of beliefs. So it's hard, it's sad. It's sad that we can't claim that in a beautiful way, that word. So, I guess I do think the divide matters. I think it's also important, to find ways, at least for me personally, I want to find ways to talk about my faith in a way that's honest. And unfortunately, I guess I am still always sort of making very clear, like, when I say this, I don't mean I was for the January 6th uprising, or something like that. I mean that I am more in the trying to figure out what I can learn from people like St. Francis and from Jesus, and how can I be in spaces. We talked about gender nation in the intro, but who are the most marginalized people right now? Who are the people who are most vulnerable and who need to be supported and celebrated, and for whom I would like the world to be a better place? And for me, in terms of, my kidlit stuff, I have found that working with Gender Nation has been just incredibly productive and healthy and totally in line with my faith, because it's about, celebrating and helping kids flourish, the way they were created to be. So I don't think that's a very good answer, but that's
So let me try to paraphrase from what I'm hearing you say. Are you saying that, like, we really should be focused on helping all these marginalized folks, right? And other things need to be dealt with, as opposed to arguing with whoever?
Yeah, I don't think I don't know that any of us have ever had a successful time arguing with anyone about these things. One thing I thought about, though, regarding the divides and also the beholding that we were talking about a few minutes ago, when I interviewed Sister Julia Walsh, who's a friend of mine, for our pre-election series, Brian, that you and I did, she's a wonderful Sister of Perpetual Adoration who lives here in Chicago, and I asked her how she deals with. She's very committed to helping people who are homeless, and she's also heard from people even within her church, some criticism of what she does and her commitment to poverty and so on. And I asked her how she dealt with that, because she is an incredibly honest and open and candid person. And she said that the way she handles those really kind of difficult conversations, when someone sort of, when I guess someone from the divide comes and is pointing out those divides, is that she pretends in her mind that she's an explorer and that she's in another land that she's never been to before, and that they're sort of speaking a different language and she doesn't really know the terrain. And so she gets curious. And so her answer to that is curiosity. And I thought that was so great. And I've tried to, adopt that practice when I can. Like, if somebody is so different and so riled up, or so their convictions and beliefs and values seem so different from my own, doing that, playing that little game in my head is actually really helpful, and thinking, okay, maybe we don't really speak the same language, so I don't think we're understanding these words the same way, and I don't really recognize this, and I think that helps.
That's a really interesting tool.
Yeah, right. And I thought she was brilliant with that, but.
So Brian, you probably more than the rest of us, you've dealt with this question. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know if it's more than anyone else, but the only thing I can say right now really is that I just think we have to remember that a whole lot of people are really passionately committed to dividing us even more. Whether it's because they're afraid or they're angry or they're greedy or they're hateful or they're, they feel threatened, whatever reason, they're very, very, they have an awful lot invested. It's a life or death matter for them to divide us even more. And what that means is those of us who have a vision for beloved community, a vision for compassion, a vision for our ultimate connectedness, are in this really weird position of having to have opponents. And in a sense, we are opponents. We're antagonists to the people who want to reify and intensify and magnify our divides. And what that, I think, requires us to do is to not try to paste over the difference, but to, as you were saying, almost like an explorer, Jennifer, excavate it and expose it and say, we really have different values. We really have a different vision here. If you win, everything I care for loses. If I win, this goes against what you're really working for. But if we're able to do that in a loving rather than hateful way, in other words, to name the division, to name the difference without rejection and hatred and disdain, if we're able to do that, the great value I think that has is if that person ever decides to switch sides, they'll know at least one person on the other side who is a safe person to defect to. And I hope that doesn't sound too negative, but that's kind of how I feel today.
Sophfronia, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking about the word curiosity, and it's that same explorer aspect that Jennifer is talking about, that it helps to be curious about why the other person is coming from that place. I wonder that line between progressive and conservative, I really wonder if it can ever really go away, right? Is that pie in the sky thinking? Not only because so many people are on one side or the other, but because, as Brian said, usually when you have a divide like that, there are people invested in the divide staying. So, but I do think that every so often you get a person who walks across the line and challenges the other side. I feel that way about Rob Bell. I feel like he stood up and challenged some things and took a lot of heat for it. But I have to believe that we will have more Rob Bells in the future, and that while the line may not totally disappear, there just may be a softening of it, and one side understanding the other. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, the place where it hits me the most is when I do things like events like this, where I'm doing advertising, or when I did the Publishing with Pride conference online earlier this year. I'd advertised for that. So both of those attracted lots of negativity. People that wanted to argue about why progressive Christians were heretical or whatever, And it's like, I don't want to spend my time having those conversations, honestly. I'd rather spend my time, starting up something new that's going to help some people or whatever, as opposed to arguing on some battleground that I don't think ultimately is going to have any effect. Now, maybe that's just an aspect of social media. I mean, I'll really admit that that might be the case.
Yeah.
But, I just, and part of this is personality too, right? How much do you feel like you can engage with people that can't be engaged with, really, in any kind of productive way? So I tend to avoid it, honestly, which maybe it's not the right thing to do, but, and thank goodness there's people who can stand there, you know what I mean, and have some of those kinds of conversations. And some of the forums that we talk about in How to Heal Our Divides, that's what they do. So thank goodness for that. It's not me. I can't do that. But
Yeah.
I really appreciate the people who can.
Yeah. Sometimes you wonder, and I think that's a very specific kind of work, right? Because the people who are willing to have those conversations are hoping or may eventually create a crack, right? Where at some point there may be change. But this is why Karen Rawlin's book, The Lightmaker's Manifesto, is of interest to me. I feel that you have to understand where your talents fit in the realm of this argument, right? Because I'm not someone who would argue with someone on social media either. I feel like my job is to stand up and state my faith and live my faith, and let others come to me if they want to talk about it or have questions. But I don't engage in that way because it's not who I am, and it's not Lightmaker for me, right? To quote her title. So I think it's important when you do engage in that way to come at it with an open heart, not to go into it thinking you're going to change somebody's mind, but to understand the other side, to look for common ground, to recognize that at the heart of it, you're both spiritual people. You're not spiritual in the same way, obviously, but you are spiritual people, and you are related in that respect, right? So this type of work involves the compassion I spoke about earlier. It involves a lot of patience and just recognizing that you are not there to change a mind.
I think that's such a great point, in that we all need to know who we are. A person who is a lawyer and who has been trained to make arguments and to defend things and to tear arguments apart or whatever, is a different person than a person who is, a potter, or whatever. And I mean, I think we all do have different gifts that we can bring, and we all have different ways that we can, and I haven't read, obviously, this, Karen Waldron's new book, but, we can all think about and be prayerful about, what is the way I'm meant to bring light? And maybe for one person it is to call out and to get into, debates with people. Maybe someone else it is to write a children's book, and maybe with someone else it's to put on conferences like Brian does, or whatever. And I think that's one thing about being sort of quiet and meditative in terms of, approaching God and saying, all right, what is the job you have for me? And we can't do everything, and we can't be every type of person. And for some of us, it's more costly to do one type of work, and we wouldn't be able to maintain it, and we would burn out, So I guess it is just that kind of humility around going, okay, I can do one thing and support other people who are doing their thing. So I think that was a great point.
That's really helpful. I appreciate that, you guys. Thank you. So on a more positive note, let's talk about what you all are up to next. Because I know you're all up to wonderful things. So Jen, what do you want to talk about in terms of, I know some of you touched on a little bit of things that are coming up, but I'd love to dive a little bit more deeply with, where you all are focusing your time going forward.
Well, so really next, as in tomorrow, I need to finish my talk for the Children's Literature Conference next week. So I've got piles of books on my desk about that. I'm also working for Beaming Books on a book, it's sort of, as I was writing Dimming the Day, which has all these topics in nature, ginkgos and humpback whales and hummingbirds and so on, I kept thinking, oh, I wish I were writing this for kids too. It's really, this obviously Dimming the Day is for adults, but I sort of kept this other file sort of open with ideas of how I might present this differently to a younger audience. And so I'm working on a book that's a different sort of book. It's not an evening reflections kind of book, but it's a book about finding calm in nature. And it's not a Christian book overtly, but it is for Beaming Books. And it's looking at ways that kids can connect with beingness in nature. So the tree or whatever living thing, that they can feel engaged with it in a new way and in a fresh way, and also find calm in that. So that book is due in February, and I've started sketching it out, and that'll be for 7 to 10-year-olds as well. And I've got a couple other conferences to prepare for, and so much reading to do, which I'm delighted to have. And now I've been writing down all these, all the books that you all are mentioning, and so look forward to digging into them. So I think it's one little snippet of what's going on.
Good. Brian, how about you?
So I am deep in final copy edits for my next book, which is called Do I Stay Christian? And so that's what I'm doing between now and next week.
And then are you going to be back out west or not?
I really didn't want to travel while COVID is still happening, but it's happening a little more than I wanted it to. So, I've got several trips happening.
Okay.
In a few weeks. Yeah.
Sophfronia, how about you?
I've been thinking I want to sit down with I have a fabulous editor at Broadleaf. I don't know if you guys have worked with her, Valerie Weaver-Zerker.
Yeah,
and
she's great.
Yeah. So I was thinking
presented at several of my conferences too.
Yes, she's awesome. So I was thinking I need to sit down with Valerie, and I need to figure out what my next nonfiction book is. And I'm not sure. I feel like Merton is still in my head, and I don't know what to do with that, where I go next,
Interesting.
I'm figuring it out. But in the meantime, I'm going to write a musical.
I know. Wow. I want to hear about that. I really would love to hear about that.
Oh, well, Brian knows I have a novel called Unforgivable Love. It takes place in Harlem in the 1940s, and this is a musical version of that.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I'm working with a fabulous young composer who's writing some amazing music. So I'm working on the book for that musical. Yeah.
So when that debuts on Broadway, please let us know, so that we can all go. I mean, I'll be going to buy a ticket for that.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, it'll be in New Jersey actually first.
Really?
Brian, so I will let you know. Yeah.
Oh, awesome! I didn't.
Yeah, it's for the American Theater Group.
So you've already got that lined up. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Good. Well, for me, the first thing is what Jennifer mentioned a couple of times is that the week of October 18th, we've got a Christian Children's Book Conference, online conference, Monday through Friday. So that'll be very exciting. Those are always so much fun. Talking about a group of authors that support each other really well. That group is phenomenal at that. So I'm looking forward to that. And then in November, we've got a Writing for Your Life conference online called Writing in the Second Half of Life. And we've got quite a few speakers lined up for that. So I'm excited about both of those. So you guys, thanks so much. I can spend hours just hanging out with all of you. You're such wonderful people, and brilliant and caring. And, those are the kinds of folks that I like to be with. And I really appreciate you taking some time to share all of that with everyone else. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.
So good to meet you all.
So next up will be Monday on the 11th, and we'll be back with 3 other panelists then, and then 3 more on Wednesday, the 13th of October. So hope to see you all then. Good night.
Brian.
Thanks very much.
Good night.
Thank you.